So Alan, can you take us through those first 3 or 4 months? What that does to a person and your cognitive abilities at that point, because even on a good day with a healthy person, having to navigate the bureaucracy of applying for some sort of government benefit is daunting enough unless you're really bureaucratic savvy. So what exactly was that like for you, that experience? I would imagine just having to think was difficult. So can you take us through those early months and how that process began with WSIB and what was happening to you internally?
Well, I suffered a very serious brain injury, so part of the results of that is I lost a very large portion of my cognitive skills, and on top of that, long-term or short-term memory was non-existent, and for several weeks afterwards, I couldn't even read and understand. So, I mean, I did have problems just reading in general, but if I had to, if you gave me a form to fill out, it would take me, I would have to read a sentence 5 times before it actually sunk in.
So do they provide a caseworker that can be of help?
So I remember calling the case manager that was assigned to my file and saying, I'm sorry, I can't even function. I can't understand the forms. I can't fill out these forms. I said, can you send me somebody to help me? And she said, no, we don't have that kind of resource. And I thought, how barbaric is this? I can't even function. I can't even read a sentence, and they're not even going to provide any help for me filling out these forms. So that tells you a lot about, you know, how bad the system is. And then, of course, during what should have been the recovery, I had mentioned earlier that I was suffering from these spasms, which actually, I think the best guess from neurologists and doctors was a severe form of the hypnic. It's called the hypnic jerk, which a lot of people experience at night when they're really fatigued, and it's just your body twitches, you know, when you're really tired, and so forth. In my case, it was really, really severe from the brain injury, the damage to the cells at the base of the skull, and so I would have my arms fly up like this, or my head would snap back at lightning speed or move from side to side, as I had mentioned. Well, it took, I think, 2.5 years for them to acknowledge that as part of my claim. So they just kept coming up with excuses. We're not covering that. Well, you have to prove it to us. Prove it to you. It's all there in the medical records. I've never experienced that prior to this. I've never had this kind of thing happen to me, but yet 2 days after the incident, it starts, and then it's a regular thing, and it's all there in the medical records, but they're denying it. Oh no, we need more proof than that. You need to see more doctors. Well, you go see this neurologist, he listens, he's going, well, I have to see it happen. Well, you never know when it's going to happen. I could, you know, And anyway, it was so severe that, on those occasions when my head did snap back at lightning speed, I suffered severe whiplash. So doctors are not going to deal with that. They don't know how to deal with that. Well, how can I prevent this? I need to prevent it, And eventually they tried different drugs, and I found a drug that helped with it. But at the same time, even with the drugs, if you get a day when you're really, really fatigued, it could still happen. And so I had to figure out ways to prevent my injuring myself. Because there was another time when I poked myself in the eye. So you can imagine if you're sleeping with your hands like this, and your body reacts to this very severe. It's like epilepsy. If you ever see somebody in a really severe epileptic seizure,
Yeah.
their body just goes so fast,
It sounds more like a jerk than a twitch. A twitch
Yeah.
is like something minor, like
Well, they
an
call
eye
it the
twitching.
hypnic jerk.
Mm.
And in my case, my fist went back into my face while I was sleeping, like this, and I poked myself right in the eye. I mean, I could have poked my eye out.
Mm.
So I had to come up with my own solutions by way of making medical contraptions that would prevent injury, And so I won't get into all that, but I spent a lot of money, and I spent a lot of time making contraptions that would prevent my head from snapping back, I had to put things behind my head, and I had to set my entire bed up with all these contraptions, and I continue to this day to sleep with straps on either side of the bed that I could put my hands in to prevent myself from smashing myself in the face. And if you could imagine, every time you move in the bed, you have to be aware of your position. Am I in a position where my head could snap back? Am I in a position where my hand could come forward and poke my eye out? So every time you change positions in bed for the rest of your life, you have to be aware of whether or not you're in a position where you could injure yourself. And so I've been living with this all these years, and I'm not getting compensated for any of that. In fact, what they did instead was they didn't want to acknowledge that this was from my brain injury. Even though a neurologist actually drew it out on a piece of paper and said, this is the only explanation I could come up with. I can't give you a diagnosis, but this is the explanation I could come up with. That the nerve cells at the three nerve cells at the base of the skull have been damaged by the electrocution through the top of the head, and that damage is what's causing these episodes of this jerk, but even then, with that partial diagnosis,
Yes.
and with other doctors saying, well, it sounds like you've developed from your brain injuries a severe form of hypnic jerk, and others referring to it as some form of night seizures, night epileptic seizures. Some doctors even refer to it as that.
Yeah.
WSIB refused to accept that. Instead, they said, we think it's, just out of the blue, we think it's sleep apnea. And so I was sent to go undergo the sleep apnea test to see if I have sleep apnea. Well, I went to one doctor, and he diagnosed me with sleep apnea because of one sleep study, which was flawed, to say the least, because I remember that day saying to the nurse who was setting me up, I said, you know, there's something wrong with the air in here. I'm really, really having a hard time breathing. This was before I was even set up to go to sleep. And so my concerns were ignored, went through that night, and they looked at the results the next day. And of course I was having problems, I knew I was having problems breathing during that study. And so naturally the results came back that I have some form of sleep apnea. And I refused to accept that because I thought, no, I never experienced problems breathing the way I did that night, so there was something wrong with the air. But no one was listening. So as part of my dispute, I said, set me up with another sleep study at the Renfrew Hospital, another hospital, because I know I don't have sleep apnea. So they did. They sent me up for another sleep study. And lo and behold, at the end of the night, the nurse conducting the sleep study and watching me sleep all night said, well, Alan, I don't think you have sleep apnea. She says, there was one little moment during the night when you stopped breathing for a few seconds. And she says, I just touched a little puff of air like this, and she says, you were fine the rest of the night. Mm-hmm. So she says, I really don't think that you have sleep apnea. But WSIB insisted that my problem with just so that, because they know that if they blame it on sleep apnea, it's a very minor
claim.
Economically speaking,
Yeah.
compared to a brain injury that is resulting in life-changing problems,
Yeah.
as in your sleep will be affected the rest of your life.
So you're basically saying they took liberties in diagnosing you with sleep apnea, when in fact, one study claimed you had it, the second study claimed you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so in most situations that would be considered inconclusive, but they took inconclusive evidence and claimed a diagnosis.
And plus they ignored the opinions of neurologists and so forth who said, well, we can't come up with a diagnosis, but we think this is what it is.
Okay, well that's troubling.